Welcome back to the AACS Applied U webinar sponsored by Bentley University and the Association for Applied and Clinical Sociology. My name is Gary David, and I am no longer the immediate past president. I have been promoted or demoted, depending on how you look at it, to the vice president-elect, and that's a longer story that you can email me about. And as we have always said, our main reason for these webinars is to provide you, the listener and viewer, with ideas of how you can take sociology and apply it in a variety of different domains. And in that spirit, I'm really excited today to welcome Dr. Jim Tanner, who is a member of the AACS board and who runs an organization called KB Solutions that he will describe, doing some fascinating work in the areas of forensics and also child protection, child endangerment, child sexual abuse, and using sociology in ways to help law enforcement catch the bad guys and protect us from them in a variety of different ways. As always, we are recording this webinar, and you can find it at the Applied U website on YouTube, where you can also find past Applied U webinars. I believe right now this is about the 9th or so Applied U webinar that we've done. We have some more interesting ones coming up that I'll talk more about in a little bit. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jim Tanner. Hi, Jim. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Gary. Thanks for the invite.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. And, you know, I got to know you a bit from being on the board. Sometimes we exchange curious looks to one another as board matters are being discussed. That's confidential. Of course, we can't go into that right now. No one wants to know the sausage is made. But I've always, since I do work in police interrogations, I've always been fascinated with the kind of work that you do, which is not an area that people might think of as being sociological. A lot of times people think of it just being the domain of psychologists. And so I was really excited to have you here to talk about how you apply sociology and how you were trained to do the kind of work that you do.
Sounds good. Well, let me sort of start with talking about what my company does. I'm a one-man company. I'm an S corporation in Colorado. I formed the corporation in 1997. And the majority of my work is in the last 50 years has been primarily in criminal justice. But KB Solutions actually has 4 arms to it. The largest arm, about 60% of my revenue, comes from training. I train at about 20 conferences a year. The conferences are attended by law enforcement, social workers, prosecutors, alphabet agencies, and most of my training revolves around child protection, sexual offending, child abuse, child pornography, those kinds of issues. Another piece of my company, I'm sworn staff in Colorado. I'm a peace officer here, and I do cybercrime. So I serve as the computer analyst, the cybercrime analyst for the 20th Judicial District of Colorado, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's about 25% of what I do. I also contract out to do research. That's about 10% of what the company does, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, about 5% of what I do is I serve as an expert witness, generally in cases around grooming, how sex offenders groom children. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. I always serve as a blind expert. A blind expert, what that means is that an individual, the district attorney gets all the information into evidence. Then I come in at the end of the prosecution's case. I know nothing about the case, and what I do is talk about how sex offenders behave and what we see across a variety of sex offenders, and it allows the jury to sort of connect the dots inside of what the evidence is already been presented in the case. So that's basically the 4 elements of my company, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them and how sociology applies in those areas as we go. Just sort of full disclosure, my sociological orientation is basically, I describe it to the world as cognitive social psychology. Probably the greatest influence in my life was Norm Denzin and Nabi Wiley at University of Illinois, where I studied. Luhmann, Schutz, James Foucault, Burgess, Garfinkel, de Saussure, Sapir. So I pay attention to, essentially I'm a phenomenologist, and I pay attention to language and how it structures internally the external world that we see, and how that kind of focuses offenders especially on what they do. So that's my orientation, just so you know who you're talking to here.
And one of the things I want to ask you about that real quick is,
you bet.
You say cognitive social psychologist. Did you find this need to, in some ways, minimize the word sociologist and how you talk about yourself, including the word psychologist in the space that you work in?
Yeah, that absolutely. That if I'm working, and I primarily work with law enforcement, cops, alphabet agencies, and you say the word sociology and their eyes roll up in their head. So basically, I describe myself as a cognitive social psychologist, but I'm always clear that my PhD is in sociology with an emphasis in cognitive social psychology, and that seems to kind of relax them. I have to be a little careful when I'm testifying in court because my job title isn't really psychologist. So I always have to specify when I'm testifying as an expert witness that I'm a sociologically trained cognitive social psychologist. And oftentimes in voir dire, they'll get into how those two differ, but generally not. So it allows me to sort of set the tone. But the direct answer to your question, Gary, is in criminal justice, especially at the law enforcement level, you say sociology and their eyes roll up in their head.
What do they do when you say phenomenologist?
I don't ever say that. Because that leads to another 20-minute conversation. So no, sociology is bad enough. Phenomenology is like a whole step further. So I just avoid that entirely.
So you don't go, let me tell you about Heidegger.
No, you start talking about Wittgenstein, and then they start, locking and loading, and you have to start running. So I don't even bring that up. The only time I use sociological, to be honest, the only time I use sociological terms is if I'm testifying in court. But I try to avoid sociological terms in testimony because who my audience is in the court is not the judge, it's the jury. And so I'm trying to help the jury understand the evidence that's in front of them. So I try to keep the language very simple, very clear, not obfuscate with big words like I just did. But the only time I use sociological terms is when I'm talking to other sociologists because it's a shortcut. And when I say phenomenology,
And then as you have Harvey Sachs's name up there, that's a good example of recipient design, that you're designing the turn of talk with the audience in mind to whom you're speaking. So right there we have applied sociology going on.
And I think that as sociologists, one of the biggest mistakes we can make is there's sort of two worlds. You've got the academic world and the journal world where you're writing to your peers and colleagues, and then you got the rest of the world. And I think as sociologists, we get too cumbersome with our language when we're talking to who we're really trying to affect, society. And so I really try to speak in plain and simple English. It's like before we had this, we were exchanging emails, and I said, okay, Gary, you're going to have to remind me what the term is in sociology because I'm so used for the last 50 years to speaking simple, low-level English that I tend to forget how to, tie that sociological term into my conversation.
Well, you're not the only one. I have the same problem when I go to business, events or talk with other people on the outside. I found that my ability to dialogue with them is much easier than my ability to dialogue with sociologists. It's almost like living abroad for so long, then you come back home. If I go to a sociology conference, I'm like, how do we talk to each other again? And it's this weird moment of like, Du Bois talking about code switching, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I got to do a this now. And over there, I got to pass it to that.
Yeah. You got to relearn Klingon when you come back home and start talking to sociologists.
Yes, and that's exactly what it sounds like, Klingon.
Okay, so here's what I worked in the intel field for a number of years, and now I work in the criminal justice for the last 50. And this is how I think about what sociology does for us. It trains us how to think. Actually, I contend that I didn't find sociology. I don't know about you, Gary. Sociology found me. That I started going to school. I came back from overseas working for the intel agency and started going to school. And all of a sudden I found these sociology classes and realized, well, that's the way I've been thinking all my life. So I think sociology finds us. And I think that what sociology does, the training we get in our sociological education, is a 4-step process. And I call it the orientation, integration, analysis, and engagement. This is sort of similar to the OODA, O-O-D-A, that the military uses, observe, orient, decide, act, but it's a little different. So let me walk through these very quickly. First of all, observation. I don't think there's any better observers in the world than a sociologist. We just always take that step back, look at the bigger picture. We try to find the connections between things in front of us and around us and what we're watching and looking at and thinking about. So we're really, really good observers, and I think getting an education in sociology improves those observation skills. I think the second thing that sociology does is, because it is, we'll talk about this in a moment, what I consider to be an umbrella science. I don't know a sociologist out there that doesn't draw from, neuropsychology, neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, all kinds of other fields. So we integrate the knowledge that we see in front of us with materials and ideas and concepts from other sciences as well to get an even bigger picture in what we're trying to do. And then the third step is analysis. And there again, that's just standard training. We apply methodology and principles to things that we've integrated and observed. And then the last step is engagement. And engagement might be that we engage the society or the group we're working with to get them to understand and change their behavior from applied to clinical sociology and AACS terms, or we engage the society at large by giving information that allows them to make decisions in their life that they weren't aware of heretofore. And that's just rinse, cycle, repeat. So I'll be talking about this, the way I think about it. The value of sociology is this cycle of observation, integration, analysis, and engagement.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that this emphasizes, and one of the things I tell students all the time, or when I'm doing mentoring, is the skills we have are the skills required. What's lacking is the translation of those skills into the different environments. And where you had a real strong leg up is that you were doing work already in a space that you were familiar. Then you found sociology, and I'm guessing it became a relatively, I won't say easy task, but a linear one to say, well, I'm learning the stuff that I know how to apply because I know the domains that I want to apply it into. Whereas a lot of sociologists who are going to school and they don't have that broader experience, and they're not taught how to translate those skills into different domains. And because they lack the experience, they're left with a big question mark of what do I do with this?
Precisely. And I was, in some sense, fortunate. I mean, when I started my PhD program, I was in my 30s. I was as old and older than some of the faculty who were teaching me. And I'd been out and done real work in the world. And so I was a criminal justice professional at that point in time. And prior to that, an Intel professional. So yeah, you're right. It was a very easy translation for me. I said, oh yeah, what sociology did was give me a conceptual matrix and a handle to hang what I was already doing on, and the conceptual matrix helped me expand the usefulness and utility of what I was already doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. And it's that, I like the visual of this, a hanger to hang it on. And, for me, at least, my lucky break in many ways was working at a business school where, I had to engage with people all the time who were not sociologists and figure out the ways of translating it. And in doing so, very quickly found that they valued what I was bringing. But as you said earlier, if I said, I'm going to do sociology now, stand back and watch, here comes the magic. I don't know that they would have been as receptive as just working in some of the things, or a lot of the things that we've been taught to do and know, and working those things into the course of the work where people go, oh yeah, that's really great. That's really valuable.
It's interesting. This is kind of an aside story. I'm spinning off on something you just said, Gary, that early on in my career, as I was being trained in the Intel world, I was in a cryptic course. And one of my instructors said, he pulled me aside and said, you seem to be really good at what you do. Let me give you a little piece of advice. And the advice he gave me, which has really been how I have run my whole career for the last 60-some years, is he said, what you do is you go out and you learn how to do everybody else's job. And then you find the gaps between their knowledge base and you fill those gaps. So, you learn criminal justice, you learn what cops do, you learn what the law says about prosecuting, and then you be the bridge, you fill the gaps between those other people. And that was the best advice I ever got in my life. And I think that sociology sort of does that. I'm about to talk about that in a second.
Great. Let's do it.
All right. So what do we do? You know, as sociologists, we always take that step back. Part of being a sociologist is stepping back and looking broader and wider. And while some of sociology is, of course, is very micro, there's always the macro piece. We always take that step back, and we're looking at the whole world. How do all these moving parts fit together? How do those gears turn each other? So we really do examine the big picture in sociology. And as I said earlier, what we do is we pull from other sciences, and I'll be talking about this in a few moments when I talk about the 3 instances in which I actually use sociology to do what I do. But I'm oftentimes pulling from neuroscience, psychology, social work, eco-science, biology, chemistry. There's always something in one of the other sciences that allows us to expand our understanding, explanation, and engagement in those things that we're trying to do. But what makes us different is that we transcend those other sciences. You know, and I mentioned this once before to you, that I think sociology is the mortar between the bricks of other sciences. We're an umbrella science. Not only are we our own and unique science, but we're an umbrella science. We draw, we pull, we integrate, we fill the gaps, we bridge between all the other sciences. And I think that's what makes us as important as we are.
And I did tell you I was going to steal that bricks and mortar thing, and I have.
Yeah.
So thank you. And
yeah.
It does remind me of, and this might be kind of corny and kitschy, but if you think about like the motto of the United States, you know, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And I do think, you know, you're like this since you're a phenomenologist, from a Gestalt perspective, right? We have this wholeness that is larger than the sum of its parts. We have this thing that sociology is able to do by integrating a variety of these different areas. And I don't know that, you know, Auguste Comte is good for much, but I think he's good for sociology as the queen of the sciences, because of the way it situate above and integrate across these different domains and create this larger gestalt of knowledge that can be applied in a variety of different directions.
Precisely. Absolutely. I agree completely. Of course, we have to be careful how we say that because we come off sounding arrogant and cocky, but we are, you know, as one of my friends said once, it's not bragging if it's true, you know, so we'll move on. So I'm going to talk about here 3 different domains in what I do and sort of show how sociology comes into it. So about probably 15 years ago, the criminal justice world was really struggling about what do sex offenders do when they're recruiting or trying to groom, that's the term we use, their child victims. And I teamed up with a friend of mine who's a psychosexual evaluator, and I've been working with sex offenders for almost 50 years, and he's been working with sex offenders for about 45. So we have almost 95 years of experience between the two of us and thousands of interviews and cases. And so what we did was we sat down, we went back through the interviews of about 3,000 different clients we'd interviewed and done analyses on. And we said, what's the commonality? We're doing a content analysis. What's the commonality here? What are there patterns that we can see that happen over and over and over again? They might be manifested slightly differently, but can we find a pattern in the basic core elements of how a sex offender grooms a child? And the answer was yes, we could, interestingly enough. We found that there were 4 constants across thousands of cases of sex offenders grooming children. And it was BRAT, the form a bond, make them reliant, to attenuate the resistance, and then finally to trap the victim in the sexual behavior. So this BRAT, these 4 elements, was across almost every case we looked at, manifested slightly differently. So we took that knowledge and we actually wrote a paper. And I have this thing about paywalls and how hard it is to get to knowledge without having money. So everything I do, I post on websites, and I don't put it in journals because people can't afford to buy journals most of the time, especially in the real world. Now, academia has the library, but the real world doesn't. So I posted it on my website. Steve posted it on his website. Steve didn't keep track. I do. That paper's been downloaded 13,590 some times since I put it up. And so I took that, and I have no idea. It's all over the world. So I took the information contained in what we had found in that content analysis, and then I translated that into presentations that I do for law enforcement, prosecutors, And since we put the paper together in 2013, I've actually trained 35,000 professionals in alphabet agencies and cops and prosecutors and therapists and probation and parole officers. So that knowledge was disseminated based off that original question. Is there a pattern? And then using content analysis and sort of an ethnographic approach, we were able to determine a pattern. And now people who are investigating child sexual abuse cases, people who are prosecuting them, understand those steps of grooming. And the people who work at child advocacy centers actually use my paper to help the victim themselves understand how they're not responsible for the trauma that the individual did to them.
And that was going to be my question right there. Was I can see why this is a valuable, bit of information for those professionals, but I would also think it's really valuable for children before they get lured into that kind of environment. So is this translated into training for for elementary schools or middle schools or anything like that?
Actually, interestingly enough, no. And that's the first place that most people go. And I've actually teamed up with a Dutch filmmaker who was groomed by her swim coach between the ages of 11 and 16. And she actually made a movie. She read my paper online, contacted me about 3 years ago, and just basically said, "Oh my God, this makes so much sense." And so she wanted to make a movie on her going through the process of deciding to report whether she reported this guy or not. And so we take clips of that movie, and she and I present together now. We take clips of that movie and show it out. So I'm come around to your question. Here's the problem, Gary, I'll be honest with you. The problem is that going out and talking to potential victims, it's the Superman phenomena that they don't see that could ever happen to them. Gotcha. And the people that sex offenders target are vulnerable anyway. And so the sex offender, when you want to ask sex offenders, how did you pick your victim? It's basically accessibility, vulnerability, attractiveness, and risk. And that's Graham Hill's work out of the UK, but that's what they tell us. Well, I look for the kid who it doesn't get their self-esteem from their parents. So the kid's vulnerable. It's the wrong kid's going to listen. I used to do parent groups. I would go to conferences for child advocacy centers to train their staff, and then we'd hold a parent group at night. And I'd always start that group by saying, "You know what? I am so happy you're here, but you're the people who don't need to be here because you're already concerned about it. It's the people who need to be here are the ones who didn't think they need to be here," as if that makes sense.
That makes all the sense in the world. It's fascinating stuff.
Yep. So what it has done, I can also tell you this, that I teach at about 20 conferences a year, and without fail, when I do a session on grooming, I'm going to have 2 or 3 people, and my audiences are usually between 300 and 600 people, and I will have 2 or 3 people come up to me after my session and say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I now understand what happened to me 15, 20 years ago." And so it's really helpful, and that's what I told Gwen van de Pas is the Dutch filmmaker. I told Gwen the value of her movie is not to help children understand how not to be groomed. It is to help the people who were groomed, were assaulted, understand what happened, how it happened, and it wasn't their fault.
I'll just mention this, that when I was in high school, there was a guy who tried to groom me, actually. It didn't work because I have a very healthy distrust of anybody. And so right away I was like, I'm not trusting this guy whatsoever. But it was very much these steps. And he actually had a whole system of kids that he would treat in these kind of ways. By forming bonds and things like that. Ironically enough, I was introduced to him at when the Pope visited Detroit, which is kind of ironic, but it was very much these kinds of things. And I look back on that and think, well, that was a close one because of how many kids that he actually was able to lure into that situation. By the way, while married with his own children.
Absolutely. That's very common. Very common. Rarely do I find a single sex offender who has molested a child. And it's almost not almost always, 70% nationwide are from a position of trust. It's a relative, extended family, teacher, clergy, coach, counselor, daycare worker. As Willie Sutton once said, was alleged to have said, when someone asked him, Willie, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is.
Right.
It turns out he didn't really actually say that. It was a reporter who misquoted him. But it's the same thing with sex offenders. We should not be surprised that they get jobs in which they have access to children. But the grooming process, you're right, Gary, the grooming process is incredibly smooth. And, there's in the paper, we don't want to go into it here. I mean, I can, but basically there's 5 ways they try to groom girls, and there's 4 ways they use to groom boys to form that bond. Secrecy is involved. There's all kinds of elements that you can look at from the outside and very quickly recognize that the individual is trying to groom a child. The other side that Steve and I talked about in 2013 that really wasn't talked about much, and here again, it's the sociologist in me, is that no one was talking about grooming the child's environment. And that's the first step, that the people put themselves in a position, they're looking for access, allure, and alibi. So they put themselves in a position where society pushes the kid to interact with the offender. Think Sandusky. Okay, right. And so the guy for the doctor for the Olympic team down in Colorado Springs. I forgot his name, starts with a P, I think. But anyway, yeah. Thank you, Larry Nasser. Yeah. So these people basically establish themselves in the environment. A sex offender doesn't generally have to look for a victim. The victim is going to be shoved to them if they've done their job grooming the environment. And that's the sociological piece again. No one was talking about the environmental grooming.
Fascinating.
Okay, so that's teaching. Cybercrime. I mentioned earlier that I'm sworn staff in Colorado, and I actually am the cybercrime analyst for the 20th Judicial District. I've examined about 1,700 sex offenders' computers. These are people who are convicted of sexual assault or convicted of possession of child pornography. And the way that works is that once the individual is convicted, then I go to the law enforcement agency and I get a copy of the evidence, a digital image of the hard drives and phones, bring them back. I have a secure lab in probation because I'm in possession of child porn. I have to have a secure lab. So I bring it back to my lab and I produce for the courts as part of the process of doing a pre-sentence investigation. I produce a report. And basically what I do is I go back through all the evidence. Law enforcement tends to look only at what's actionable. So they're only looking for grooming the kid, trying to lure them over the internet, or possession of images of child pornography, or what we call sexually explicit material of children, or exploitative material. I go back and look at, again, the sociologist in me, I go back and look at the whole thing. What else is he looking at? What kinds of legal porn is he looking at? Is he engaging in other things that could facilitate or show a fixation in a particular kind of behavior? So this report becomes part of the pre-sentence report that goes to the court when the court's trying to make the decision of what's going to happen to a convicted sex offender. Well, after I did about 1,000 of those, I got to thinking, here I go again, am I seeing patterns? And one of the problems we have in the sex offender world is that the tools that we use to assess risk of sex offenders, the Sonar, the Razor, the Static 99, the Static 2000, none of those address digital behavior. So that a person who's only active, sexually aggressive in digital behavior comes up low risk on all the assessment tools that we currently are using. So I went back and I said, okay, looking at these guys who have been convicted and looking at their computers in a broader scope, are there factors that indicate the individual is overly involved in digital sexual behavior, and should those factors be considered in the determination of risk? And the answer was yes, there were 14 factors, 6 main ones and 8 secondary ones. So I published again on that, and the state of Colorado actually implemented that and put it into the standards and guidelines for the treatment, supervision, and polygraphy of sex offenders. So just something that kind of got me thinking. Again, content analysis, looking through, extracting the patterns, actually became part of the state standards for the state of Colorado. Then on top of that, one of the problems that we have in the law enforcement world is that forensic laboratories are extremely expensive, and they get buried, absolutely buried with work. So the local district attorney's office was looking for a way to reduce the load on the labs for people who are in possession of child pornography. And now, hands-on assault, that's different, but just the people in possession of child pornography. So I worked with them using the same information, these factors, and the district attorney's office and I, pardon me, developed a screening tool that we use to put individuals in 4 different sort of levels of risk, although we don't call it risk. And then the district attorney and the law enforcement labs adjust how much work they put on any given case based on the level that they come out on this screening tool that was developed jointly between the district attorney and me, and the information that I pulled from these 1,700 computer forensic exams. So here, once again, we see sort of an ethnographic and content analysis, and stepping back, taking a look at the big picture and how that information is then translated into action in the community that actually winds up protecting children and lessening the load on those agencies that are tasked with protecting children.
A lot of people will talk about the sociological imagination, but what I really like about what you're saying here is the sociological vision, that this system's perspective, this able to kind of look across all these different elements. Again, going back to your phenomenological training, right? It's not that different from being able to analyze, lived experiences, embodied action, things like that, to being able to detect patterns in these different kinds of systemic environments.
Precisely, and again, I'm back to that observation, integration, analysis, and then engagement. It is the sociological imagination. It's the sociological vision. It's just us doing what comes natural, I think, to most sociologists, and then is honed through our education and experience.
Yeah, I like the natural element, because I always like to think of people in 3 buckets: those who can, those who can't, and those who could. And for, I think, many sociologists, as you said, sociology found me too. I thought, oh, well, you mean there's a thing that's called what I do all the time? I had no idea.
Right.
Wow.
Neither did I. It's like, whoa, that's kind of slick.
I know, that makes my decision on what to do for a living easy, because I knew what I didn't want to do, which was mostly everything else. And then comes this idea, okay, Mom, guess what? I found my passion. Great. What's it called? Sociology. Oh, what can you do with it? I don't know. But now at least,
I don't know, WTF, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's great. I love it. Well, can you move out of the house with it? That's the question I want to be able to answer. And the nice thing about this is that no class. I could take a crim class, and I teach, criminal and social justice, and I don't know that there would be a direct line from a sociology of deviance class to you can use this course to do what you're doing right now. I don't know people draw that direct line.
I don't think they do. Well, let's take one more domain here, and that's the research domain. So in fall of 2018, the Colorado Supreme Court made a decision that caused the departments, probation departments all across the state, to have to rewrite the terms and conditions that convicted sex offenders are assigned when they're placed on probation in the community. And basically what the issue was around was the restricted access to sexually explicit material. Now, sexually explicit material is any sexually explicit material, and that includes legal pornography. So convicted sex offenders obviously can't break the law. They can't be in possession of child porn. That's a crime. But there's this whole First Amendment issue of do they have a right to have access to legal pornography? And so the Supreme Court said, look, I'm making a very complex argument, very simple, but basically what the court said to probation and parole in Colorado was that you have to have a nexus, a connection between the individual's offense and the reason that you are telling him he can't have access to sex explicit material and he can't have access to Facebook and, Kik and whatever. So unfortunately for the state of Colorado, this decision came down and they had literally 2 weeks to rewrite the terms and conditions and then figure out how they're going to use them. So they turned to me, they hired me, and I had 10 days. That I want to make this clear. This all happened in 10 days. In 10 days, they said, I want you to figure out how we create that nexus and give us a standing that we can stand on in court to get the judge to order these 4 actual special additions. So what I did what I talked about earlier. I went back and I pulled psychology, the addiction literature, neuroscience, case law, that's basically looking at all kinds of the state statutes. What's the statute say? Probation, parole is all about. So I downloaded and read in about 8 days, probably 400 different articles in statutes and cases. And out of that, I understood that there was some nexus there, but the second thing I had to do, again, you do this, Gary, all the time, is I had to look at the structure of the organization. What's the justice system look like? So now I know what needs to be in the decision, who's got the information, and how does it get into the system in such a way that the decision maker, the judge, gets it accurately. So the second stage of this process is fortunately, I've been working in the justice system for almost 50 years, so I sort of understood it, but I had to, ferret out the nuances. Who's got the information? How does it get in? How does it get applied? And out of that, I produced a paper for the justice system in Colorado that had 73 references in it from neuroscience and science and addiction literature and psychology, and actually a couple phenomenological pieces. And I actually also included in that paper boilerplate language. Here's language for each one of these special conditions that you can boilerplate into your pre-sentence investigation and your recommendations to the court to get the court to see the nexus between all this research and the condition that you're trying to get the court to apply. And the last page of that paper was a form that I had created, which was adopted statewide for all the probation departments, a simple checkbox form. If this element is in the presenting problem, the crime, then these conditions are recommended, and then they just take the boilerplate language and put it in the PSI. And that was in October, and it's been running a year now, and it's working pretty smoothly. So here again, it's just sort of looking at the whole system, what all's involved, who in the system has information that can be important, and how do we get that information from them into the flow, and then producing language. There's the engagement. I actually wrote up language and created a form that they could use to simplify it. And the form takes literally 2 minutes to check, and then they just pull the boilerplate language out of the paper.
Well, so, I mean, since God created the earth in 6 days, I mean, I don't know, 10 days seems like you had a long time. It doesn't seem so bad.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And, it's one of the things that makes me, I love about this and also frustrates me about this story is because, in an academic environment, an academic world, as a professor, if I didn't publish this in a research journal, I might not get credit for having any impact because it wasn't published in a peer-reviewed journal, which might take 2 years or 3 years to get published. But yet here you have this massively impactful document, which is derived from rigorous research that had to actually meet much higher standards than peer review. In order
absolutely.
To verify. Yeah. I mean, come on, you're dealing with the government, and you had to pass through this entire system, and people had to sign off on it as being a valid representation of knowledge established in a domain. And yet in an academic world, and this is why people look at academic jobs and go, no, thank you. In an academic world, people would look at this and say, meh, it really didn't publish it anyways. What does it matter?
And that really is, that is a huge stumbling block for getting into applied sociology and clinical sociology. This is like one project I've done. That paper is also on my website because everything I do, not everything I do, a lot of what I do is very proprietary and can't be released outside the agency I work for. But everything that I can release is on the website. It's available, free, take it, use it, run with it. But you're right, an academic would get no credit for this. Yet I changed the system in 10 days in the state of Colorado, radically changed the system. And for me, that's the payoff. Now, this one I actually got paid a pretty good chunk of change for.
Well, that helps too.
Yeah, it's more important to me that I help the system be as good as it can be.
Right, exactly, especially considering the topics you're dealing with here. I mean, the higher calling, and people often, sociologists will often confuse getting paid with devaluing work. And, it's okay to get paid for what we know how to do and what we can do, but also it's a perfect demonstration of maintaining the value structure of what sociology is supposed to be about, with also being able to be validated in terms of your expertise through actually having compensation.
Yeah, you're right, and it's the path I chose. I haven't published anything in a journal since graduate school, and graduate school was many decades ago. It's because all of my work is truly applied and clinical. And so, like I said earlier, it's either proprietary because it goes to the agency that hired me to do it, or it's public in the sense that I'm helping inform and form public policy in how in the criminal justice systems things actually work. I mean, I've worked for the Colorado legislature numerous times doing exactly what I just described here. They're about to struggle with some law, and I'll come along and do research and, okay, I'd go testify in front of the committee. Here's what I think. You guys take it or leave it. I don't care. And it's very rewarding. You got to feed your family, but yeah, it is. So basically, I think all of this is sociology. You know, it is. We talked about this several times. It's this pattern of knowing what we do and doing what we do, and manifesting it in plain and simple language. My audience is always the jury, the judge, or society. It is never another professional. And so it is a professional in the sense as a cop or a therapist or a child advocacy worker. That kind of professional, but not an academic. I never write for academics because, frankly, half the time I don't understand half of what people put in journals to begin with. The language is so obtuse. But the foundation for me of sociology is this cycle, and is the fact we always step back and take that bigger view. It is the imagination and the vision and the application of honed skills and what we all do naturally anyway.
That's an interesting visual too. Where'd you pull that visual from?
Well, actually, that is a picture I took. It was on a castle in Romania. I can give it to you if you want. I mean, it's my picture. Yeah, Mary and I, my wife and I travel a lot, and I always try to find something interesting to shoot. There were all these little gargoyles on castles, and it was a castle in Romania. And this guy, I just love this guy. So
that's a great one.
He's always my final.
It's a good brand for you. There's a resemblance actually, and I guys ever told you that. Not the wings, but
no.
certain elements and traits of it looks familiar. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and I do wonder about, is because as a professional culture, sociology can be inherently suspicious of quote unquote the man, and by and large, that's been your career, right? Working with, as you said, alphabet agencies, which are, FBI, CIA, other kinds of government agencies that you have worked for and trained. And have you come up across that in discussions with sociologists when you tell them who you are, what you do, who you work for, what kinds of things you inform? Have you ever had that kind of pushback?
Yeah, I do sometimes get it. Well, you work for the man, and there are good and bad men. Most of the other side of that, 15 thoughts hitting me at once here. It's a great question, Gary. Sometimes I get pushback from sociologists and frankly, and other people. When I do, I just ignore the source because they're just uninformed. There are very, very few people I've met in my career in the man's position who really don't try to do the right thing. Now, they may disagree on what the right thing is, but my job is to understand, here we go again, phenomenology. My job is to understand the world the way they see it.
Right.
And once I understand how they view the world, people only act logically. And no matter how crazy their behavior seems, at that moment in time, it's logical to them. So my job is to understand their worldview. Then once I do, I can see what's missing in that worldview, and then I try to put into that worldview information so that they can no longer see that behavior as being logical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world because I'm a methodologist.
Yeah. And so basically, most of the cops I work with really are hungry. I mean, literally, the Crimes Against Children's Conference, I have audiences as many as 800 sitting in the audience in one of my presentations, and they're hungry for information. They want to do a good job. They want to do it right. Yeah, there's some idiots out there, but there's idiots in every field out there. But yeah, I do get some pushback sometimes.
And I try to maintain the same kind of stance as we discussed when I'm doing work on the police interrogations. I'm not assuming anything in terms of the motivation of the police who are doing the questioning of a suspect. Likewise, I'm not assuming anything about the suspect's motivation. What I'm trying to do is examine what's observably present in the interaction and in the transcript. What can I speak to that's there to be seen, not what's happening as a mental construct or state. And that's just pure ethnomethodology and conversation analysis. And to me, at least, from a legal perspective, they like that. I mean, lawyers like
absolutely
that because it's not my opinion what's happening. I'm trying to show you what I see there in the actual structure of talk and interaction.
You know, it's interesting, you know, we're sort of digressing, but that's okay. That's what sociology is all about. It's taking a broader picture. People who have not had much experience with law enforcement, I'm going to talk now about one of my areas, and one of my major areas of focus is child sexual assault, you know, exploitation of children. And I can tell you, most people, if you ask them, what makes a cop lose sleep at night? What goes bump in the night for a cop? Most people in the public would think it's a bad guy getting away. And in my field, child sexual assault, I can tell you that's not what makes it goes bump in the middle of the night for cops, the detectives who work child sexual assault. The thing that scares them the most is falsely accusing someone of committing a sexual assault on a child, because that accusation is life-changing for that individual. And every cop I've ever worked with for almost 5 decades now really goes the extra mile to be sure in their mind this guy's dirty before they make that accusation, because it is a horrendous accusation to make. And that's why they're hungry. They want information. They want to know anything that will help them feel okay in making that decision. I remember when I was going through my graduate work, the chair of my dissertation was Dave Bourdieu. And Dave Bourdieu years ago was the godfather of juvenile delinquency in criminology. And one day he and I were talking. I'd already been a probation officer for over a decade when I went back to get my PhD. And Dave and I were talking. And he was saying, well, you know, you're kind of focused. You need to take a little broader. You need to be able to see both sides. And I said, Dave, you're right. But understand that I came out of a job where I don't have the luxury of seeing both sides, because I'm making 15, 20 destiny decisions in any given day. And I've got to feel comfortable making those decisions or I'm going to eat a bullet.
Right.
And he hadn't thought about that. He hadn't thought about it. And so cops want the information. Law enforcement wants that information so they can feel comfortable making this horrendous allegation against anybody.
And I find when I do the police interrogation stuff too, I can't assume, and I don't assume that cops just don't care if the person's guilty or not. They just want a confession. You will find those; they do exist, but I wouldn't say that that's the default state. And that, you know,
they want the truth.
Yeah, and the stuff that I see, generally speaking, is the techniques that they're using. They've been trained in without knowing the potential hazards of them, and might do things unintentionally. And one of the police officers that I worked with for retired, Jim Trainum, that was his experience. He fed a suspect all this information. He didn't realize he had done it until he went back, looked at the videotape that they by accident had recorded, and then analyzed this. Does this sound familiar? Analyzed his talk, his interaction, and, you know, reflexively recognized that, oh my God, I gave the suspect all this information that she then incorporated into her confession, which then became confirmation of her guilt.
Yep.
And it was just pure sociology.
And, you know, and the old, you know, the Reed technique, the 9 steps of the Reed technique was the old way. And now it's moved to the cognitive structured interview now. The law enforcement is moving away from Reed. Even Reed's changing his style. But you're right, Gary, that was the training they got. You know, you propose all these things, you give them reasonable reasons to have done what they did. And then in the process of doing that, you're helping them build a framework. If they do make a confession and it's false, they make it in such a way it shoots them in the foot.
Yeah, the old theme development. So it's, and you know,
precisely.
It's this area of how do we use what we know how to do in different domains that add value to those who are trying to do it themselves. And for me, that becomes the essence of applied and clinical sociology. And so a quick question for you, given your range of experience, your many years of working, if you were going to redesign a graduate program in sociology to be more applied and clinical in nature, to give people an avenue, a pathway for non-academic employment, what would it look like to you? How would you do it?
Actually, I was on faculty of three different universities. Most of my time was spent at Wichita State University. I was full-time faculty there. And one of my responsibilities was running an internship program. And I really believe in internships. I mean, the structure, I think that individual courses have to have an element of applied in the course. You've got to help people make that transition. You've got to show them, you've got to show them how to do it. You model it, you talk about it, you explain it, and then you ask them, how does this translate into the real world? And you help them discover that translation. But the most important thing you can do is put them in a situation, in a place, and we usually had at Wichita State University, I usually had about 15 interns at any point in time in the social department, working someplace in the system. Mental health, probation, parole, the alcohol treatment centers, and then we would meet as a class and we would discuss how is it how do you transfer that? What's it look like? What did you do today? Okay, what's that look like sociologically? How did you come to do that? So I'm a real big believer in internships, especially if you're trying to develop a clinical applied program. You can't do it in a classroom.
And what would you do if there's a person listening to this, assuming someone's going to listen to us at some point? How would you advise a student who's listening to this going, you know what, I'm really interested in law enforcement. I'm interested in criminal justice. I'm really attracted to this kind of work. You're already involved in that world when you started your PhD program. What's a suitable pathway for someone who may not be yet involved in that world, looking for opportunities to do this kind of work or apply in sociology and is not sure how to do that?
Excellent question. There's two avenues through which students can gain experience and knowledge base of the world, in the criminal justice world. Almost every probation department I'm aware of, and I train nationally to probation departments, almost all of them have some sort of a volunteer program. So you just go down and volunteer. You have to go through a background check, and then you'll actually run low-level caseloads. You'll be sworn in most cases as a deputy probation officer, which is not really a peace officer, but it gives you the ability to do what you do. So volunteer program. The second way is that almost every jurisdiction, meaning state, large city, has some form of halfway houses or semi-residential programs, and oftentimes they need people to work there, and that is a wonderful place to gain knowledge and experience. And it's a 24/7 job, so it can work with school schedules. You can work a swing shift or a graveyard shift, and you gain a lot of experience in terms of understanding offenders and how the justice system works. Now, I have to qualify that there are good and bad residential programs out there. Not every private, not every for-profit correctional program is bad. Not every one of them is good either. So you have to be a little careful where you apply to. But if they're wanting to get in criminal justice, law enforcement agencies have you have to be 21. Law enforcement agencies have volunteers and reserves, and probation departments have volunteers. Just go out there and ask. I want to learn. How can I give you something? And that's the other thing, Gary, you and I have talked about this. When you first branch out and start becoming a sociologist in the community, you got to give some stuff away at first. You can't walk in asking for $10,000 when you haven't got any street creds. You got to get the street creds first, and you get that through doing something that's valuable, and then it's a word of mouth.
One of the things that I did this past winter that I told you about, which was hugely valuable in my teaching in my criminal and social justice class, was I went through about a 10-week program in my town police department on, basically learning and understanding how the police go about doing their job. And it was pretty instrumental to at least giving me a sense of how police approach what it is that they do and what goes through their minds when they do it. Not that you have to agree or disagree or whatever, that's a personal decision, but at least gave me that understanding of. And so people, wherever you live, even if it's on campus, you can go to your campus police and see if they have a program that will, kind of an orientation or an apprenticeship or a community policing program that you can learn what it is like, riding in a car, wearing the uniform, doing a traffic stop, questioning a suspect,
Yep.
all of those things that we don't even think about, but they have to do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And, the most dangerous thing to do is that state trooper in the middle of nowhere doing a traffic stop with no backup. That is incredibly dangerous.
I just saw, I think it was on my Twitter feed, because of the stuff I follow. The Alaska state troopers are looking for people. And, they're willing to pay you like a $10,000 bonus and paying for moving expenses and even get a take-home car. And I was just thinking what it must be like to be a state trooper in Alaska.
In Alaska. No kidding.
Moose, bear,
really.
and meth or whatever else is going on up there. I'm not quite sure. Well,
actually, I was quickest story. I was doing training in Alaska. I was actually in Anchorage, and I had probation and state troopers in the class. And on a break, two of the guys were talking. They both lived in Anchorage, Alaska, right? And one guy says to the other guy, well, my 13-year-old daughter killed her first bear last night.
Sure.
And the other guy says, really? Where did she shoot him? And the guy says, in the kitchen. So it's like, okay, Alaska.
Yeah. I know that. That's what did they do with the bear after they shot him? Did they say?
Well, they harvest the meat and give it to.
Sure, well, there you go. They got a rug, maybe a purse.
Yep. Right.
It's like Christmas gifts for everybody.
But we digress.
Yeah, well, that's like you said, that's what we do. And sociology is nothing but a digression, and hopefully out of the digression, we find innovation and opportunities. So there we go.
Right.
But I do want to thank you so much for taking the time and out of catching bad guys, for giving us a sense of how you use sociology. I mean, I found it interesting, and that's ultimately what's important to me, is how interesting it is to me. And I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be interesting to a lot of people, including a friend of mine who is 52 years old and is in the is going to the police academy to join the Grand Junction Police Force at 52.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to definitely share it with him because I know he's going to find value with it. And I want to thank everybody who's listening to this, downloading this. Feel free to share this out. Give it to friends of yours who are sociologists or other people that might be interested, spreading the word of how we can apply sociology. And please, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you go to YouTube, to Applied U, to our YouTube channel, to find the other 9 or 10 or so Applied U webinars that we've done. I also will encourage everybody, go to the AACS website, which is undergoing radical transformations, both now and in the future, at aacsnet.net for information about our upcoming conference, which is going to be taking place in October of 2020 in Atlanta, in Buckhead, where you will be able to, if you attend, find all kinds of applied and clinical sociologists. And Jim, as a quick aside, real quick, I was talking to a person yesterday who, basically did not know that there were more applied sociologists and was struggling with her identity, that how come no one values what it is? I feel like such an outsider. No one values what it is I want to do with sociology. And then we chatted and she went, oh my God, I had no idea there were more people like me. So there are more people like you out there.
There are, and we're all in this together. Gary, thanks for the invite. I enjoyed doing this.
All right. Thanks so much, Jim. And we will catch up soon. And thanks everybody for taking the time to listen. Bye.